Today, let's talk a little bit about irrational beliefs and how they influence how we do communicate with others. And before we start talking about irrational belief, let's talk about facts. And these facts are usually part of every conversation between two people. And if those two people would just talk about these facts, there wouldn't be an issue. But what we usually do is, for every fact, we add something. And what we add is fantasy. And if that wouldn't be enough, because the fantasy, as you can see, makes it more difficult to see the other person, we add a third portion to that conversation, and that's probably a very difficult part of it. And this is judgment. So as you can see from the small piece of facts, we suddenly have created a mountain that makes it impossible to see the other person. And if we stick with the facts, if we try to stick with the facts, which are the important part in the conversation, they are also some kind of a trigger, a hot button, something like people press in game shows. It's kind of a buzzer. And let's take a look at this buzzer a little bit more in depth. So if we take the facts, if we have the fantasy, and if we add some judgment, what is happening with the facts if we consider them as kind of a hot button? And there are three elements that I would like to discuss. It's called an ABC framework because we have activating events, these facts, the buzzer. And activating events, like I said, they're triggering something in you. They're like the hot button. And each and every one of us has these type of hot buttons. And the problem with them is they're very often unconscious. And that makes it difficult to see them, to feel them. You just realize something is going on, but you don't know why that is happening. And as in the picture, there is no direct link between the facts and the activating event. And as I said, those activating events, the hot button, can be triggered by something or someone. And they can not only be unconscious from your perspective, so you don't know what's happening, they can also be triggered by someone unconsciously, or they can be triggered by someone consciously. So if I want to trigger you, I'm trying to press your hot button to make you a bit nervous. And this is something that we will see in the next sequence of flows. So something can trigger it as well. Obviously, something is not going to do it consciously, like the new iPhone that you want to get and you change your behaviors just to get it. So something or someone can trigger it. And the next thing that is important here, I said it's called an ABC framework, is the belief that is underlying all this unconsciousness and that is lying under the trigger. And these beliefs are things that are very often irrational. These are things that you have learned. Probably during your socialization. Probably in your culture. And probably a lot influenced by the shadow of their object, of your object, the shadow that is being cast over you by your education, by your parents in many cases. And what is happening now if something is being triggered during a conversation? Your beliefs are acting as a kind of a filter, let's add that here. you will see consequences. Sometimes you don't see consequences, you just feel them, but there are consequences. They can be positive, for sure. But in many cases, they're also negative. And let's focus on the negative aspects for now, because this is what makes the conversation dysfunctional in many ways. And what comes up here, the consequences often are feelings or emotions. And like I said, they can trigger you in a way, they can influence you in a way that makes the conversation or your behavior, your experience of the conversation dysfunctional. So here it seems to be quite important to figure out what are the activating events that trigger a belief of yourself that lead to certain consequences in your behavior. And like I said, it's visible, so you behave in a certain way, or it's invisible in the first place because it's feelings and emotions that come up. And we can see that as kind of an impulse. So let's take a look at the third part of the framework. We have impulses, and these impulses usually lead to something that is called anxiety. Like I said, I'm focusing on the dysfunctional aspects of this framework at the moment. And if the impulse is leading to anxiety, defenses are triggered. And now we have a triangle of conflict. And if you sit with the defense and give in to the defense, you disconnect from the impulse, you disconnect from your feelings, you do not realize what your filter is, and you will never know your hot button. So it is quite important from the defense point to reconnect to the impulse. And there are two things. The positive one is reconnect. But the negative aspect that can also happen if we do not figure that out is a split. And then you maintain with your defenses, you maintain with your anxiety, and you think that the other person is an idiot. So what we're trying to do is one thing. Let's think about the unthought known. You know it, but you have never thought about it. Think about your past, something that is influencing you, and very often this is an object, someone who was important for you in your past. And that starts with early childhood as an infant, and that goes up until now to the point where you watch this video. So someone can trigger that in you. And to get to know this person, to get to know yourself a little bit better, think the unthought known, and then restructure. It's a very cognitive approach. Probably that's one of the criticism about these frameworks. It's probably too cognitive, but it's one way to deal with defense and anxiety, to bring it from your gut to your mind again. And now from this aspect, thinking the unthought known, restructuring it, the question is, how can we do it? And the solution for me would be, or one solution would be, frustration. So let's try to talk about frustration real quick. And usually what we as humans tend to do is that we stay in the comfort zone. And that is nice and cozy. That is the equilibrium. And in the equilibrium, we are quite stable. There is not too much of a movement. And that makes it cozy. But it also makes it very tricky because there is no movement, so there is no development. And what we're trying to achieve is to be in this zone here. Let's stay in this learning zone, because this is the area where you will probably take the most out of the frustration that you can feel here, out of the anxiety that you feel here. Problem here is that we have to avoid the panic zone. If we are in the panic zone, of course, no learning will be possible because your feelings and emotions take over. So this is where we started. We started with facts, two people discussing them. And what I tried to open up a little bit was the lower part of the iceberg sitting underneath the facts, because this is where the conflict happens if we are not able to break this vicious cycle. And these are the ABC framework and the triangle of conflict by Malan.